This blog post is on looking at Leonardo's St. Jerome. It's going to be on exhibition at the Metropolitan Museum from July 15th through October 6th, 2019, and it will probably be mobbed, but you should go if you can. Leonardo made multiple major innovations in painting, innovations that gave himself and all the artists who followed him greater power to make viewers like us stop, look, and think about paintings. Seeing and understanding the work of anyone on that level is always worthwhile. If you live in the United States, this is one of your few chances to see a Leonardo painting. The only one of his paintings that resides here permanently is Ginevra da Benci at the National Gallery. Since the whole point of going to the exhibition is to look at the painting, I'm going to talk about that first. Afterwards, I'll talk about who Jerome was, the historical context of the painting, and Leonardo's innovations in this painting. Warning! Take headphones or earplugs when you go see this exhibition. The audio from a nearby exhibition in the Lehman Wing is loud enough to hear in the room where Leonardo's St. Jerome is displayed. If you're there for more than a minute, the noise is really annoying. Let's look at the painting. Leonardo began St. Jerome around 1480, and he left it incomplete when he died in 1519. It was later sawed into pieces and then reassembled. There were probably pieces missing from the edges. So, although we can't judge this as a finished work, it still reveals a great deal about what makes Leonardo's work so fascinating and so influential. So this picture is of the painting as it exists today. This is not a bad photograph. A lot of the painting is actually quite dark. The area that immediately draws our eye is Jerome's head and his right shoulder. Clearly these parts were the ones that most interested Leonardo. He really worked on the detail here. The figure seems to be an emaciated old man. His face is wrinkled. His eyes, which strain upward, are sunk deep in his face. His cheekbones and his jaw jut out. Only one tooth is visible in his mouth. What about the rest of the figure? Although the shoulder is drawn with precise attention to bones and muscles, the rest of that arm and the hand are drawn only in outline. Yet their position tells us something about Jerome. He has a rock in his hand, and his hand is stretched away as far as possible. He's going to beat his breast with that rock, and not gently either, with as much force as his swinging arm can muster. The loose drapery, barely sketched, is falling off. Beneath it we glimpse Jerome's torso, where the ribs stick out like bare bones, another clue to how emaciated he is. His body twists, and his leg is awkwardly bent into a kneeling posture. He looks wretched and humble. No other human beings are present, but at Jerome's feet, a lion is lightly sketched in. The lion is associated with Jerome because, according to a later biography, Jerome realized that an angry lion who came to his monastery was being pained by a thorn in his foot. Quoting from that biography, "Then this holy man put thereto diligent cure and healed him, and he, the lion, abode ever after as a tame beast with them." End of quote. The lion is looking up toward Leonardo. His mouth is open. Did Leonardo intend him to be roaring with anger at Jerome or aghast? We will never know. Jerome and the lion are in a dark cave. Behind Jerome at our left is the outside world, a mysterious rocky landscape similar to that in his Virgin of the Rocks, which is on the right. Jerome's agitated gaze is focused at a break in the rocks to our right. The cross at which he gazes is within that bright area. It's visible only as a few long vertical lines. That's this here. In the distance within the same area, Leonardo sketched a church. So Jerome is literally turning his back on the outside world in order to focus on God and the church. The direction of Jerome's gaze is emphasized by the line of his arm, a strong diagonal from the hand holding the stone through the arm to the eyes and then to the cross. Imagine if that arm simply hung at his side. Our eyes wouldn't move so surely upward and to the right. It's the strong diagonal, the only one in the painting, that makes us look in that direction. Let's turn briefly from the what to the how of the painting, from the objects within it to their attributes. The amount of detail on Jerome's face and shoulder is one reason we look immediately at them. Another reason is the highlights on Jerome's bald head, cheekbones, jaw, and shoulder. The highlight on the front of his chin makes us notice that he's humbly kneeling. Leonardo is famous for this technique, chiaroscuro, the contrast of bright light and darkness. In the Virgin of the Rocks, which Leonardo worked on from 1495 to 1508, so it overlaps with this painting, chiaroscuro makes the faces and gestures of the four figures stand out despite the darkness of the cave. So Leonardo's painting shows an emaciated, humble, self-flagellating man who rejects the outer world, the landscape at the left, in order to focus on religion, the crucifix and the church. Let's talk now about Jerome's story. Jerome, whose dates are around 347 to 420, ranks as one of the forefathers of the church due to his translation of the Bible into Latin. It's called the Vulgate, and also to his extensive commentaries on the Old and New Testaments. Leonardo would have known of Jerome's life from the Golden Legend, a collection of lives of the saints that was composed in the late 13th century. During the 15th century, when Leonardo was born, it appeared in more printed editions than the Bible. According to the Golden Legend, after becoming a cardinal at age 29 and studying with Gregory Nazianzen in Constantinople, Jerome retreated to the wilderness. There, for 4 years, he attempted to suppress his sexual desires by fasting and prayer. When he still had thoughts of earthly delights, he punished himself further. Quote, "I was oft fellow unto scorpions and wild beasts. And for to daunt and subdue my proud flesh, I rose at midnight all the week long, joining off the night with the day, and I ceased not to beat my breast." End of quote. That's from Caxton's translation of the Golden Legend. In paintings that depict this part of Jerome's life, he's often shown staring at a crucifix while holding a stone with which to beat his breast. Let's look at some other paintings of Jerome. Because Jerome was one of the most important figures in the early church, artists before Leonardo, and many artists after also, tended to emphasize his dignity rather than his suffering. So here are two examples of paintings from the 15th century. In this one, he's sitting upright. He actually looks thin but healthy. And in this one, also, his abs are not emaciated. These two are from the 16th century. Here he has a book and a bright white bunny and apparently a supply of OxyClean to keep his drapery shining white. And there's some sort of man-made object here. He's not just living in an abandoned cave. And on this one, he's sort of making an elegant step forward in this gray shift. But he has the stone there, and I believe that's supposed to be a lion down in the corner. Unlike those other artists, Leonardo didn't say, how would it be proper for a father of the church to look? Leonardo is very much this world oriented, even to the point of dissecting cadavers, a practice of which the church strongly disapproved. Leonardo asks himself instead, what would Jerome look like and feel like if he actually treated himself as brutally as he's said to have done? Leonardo's answer is wrinkled, emaciated, bent, and almost toothless. I want to talk now for a few minutes about Leonardo as an innovator. What the Greeks and the Romans knew about depicting man and this earth was lost after the fall of Rome. During the Middle Ages, such subjects were not a priority. The important goal was to tell biblical stories that would help save the souls of all those illiterate Christians. But beginning in the 14th century, European painters began relearning how to paint men and how to create the illusion of three-dimensional reality on a two-dimensional surface. In 15th century Florence, the focal point of the Renaissance, Masaccio pioneered the use of mathematically calculated linear perspective in his Trinity, that's on the left in this slide, and other works. Over the next few decades, Florentines painted charming, elegant and dignified figures. Even in this top painting where they're going to blow a shell into the ear of Mars and just wake him up dreadfully, they all look so calm and polite and genteel. Meanwhile, at this time in Northern Europe, the use of oil paints was developed, which allowed artists to render vivid colors, minute detail, and infinite gradations, which is particularly useful for atmospheric perspective. You can see it here in the back of the landscape. When Leonardo was born in 1452, his hometown of Florence was the best place in Europe to learn about all the recent innovations in painting that had been discovered by Italian and Northern European artists. Leonardo proceeded to outdo all of his contemporaries in innovations. Only 15 paintings are widely accepted as his work. 2 of the largest and most complex are unfinished, this St. Jerome and his Adoration of the Magi on the right. Yet of the 24 or so major innovations in painting, from the time of cave paintings to the present, Leonardo was responsible for 4. St. Jerome, begun in 1480, illustrates 3 of those. One of the innovations is the sharp light-dark contrast known as chiaroscuro, which throws a spotlight on certain parts of the painting. We saw that in the highlights that draw our eyes to Jerome's head and shoulder and bended knee. Using this technique, Leonardo had no need to emphasize important areas of the painting by means of distortions of size or garish colors. Another of Leonardo's innovations was the use of geometric forms in composition. In St. Jerome, the form is simply the diagonal line that runs from the rock in his hand through his arm and his eyes to the crucifix. In the Adoration of the Magi from 1481, the geometric forms are more complex, but I'm not going to talk about that right now. With this sort of organization, compositional organization, in his arsenal, Leonardo could include large groups of people or objects, but still control where his viewers' eyes were going to focus. A third innovation by Leonardo that's illustrated in St. Jerome is the creation of portraits with riveting psychological depth. Italian painters of the early 15th century usually did portraits in profile, like portraits on Roman coins. The one on the left is an Italian portrait. Northern European artists produced exquisitely detailed portraits in 3/4 view, which is halfway between profile and full face. Artists from both areas created portraits that very precisely rendered the physical characteristics of their sitters. Leonardo's innovation here was an obsession with showing not just the physical appearance of his sitters, but their inner lives, their characters. He conveys this partly by expression, which he renders with anatomical precision, and partly by the props and the setting of his sitters. In finished paintings such as Woman with an Ermine and Mona Lisa, this psychological depth is obvious. In St. Jerome, the character is conveyed by Jerome's expression, his posture, his emaciated form, and his rejection of the outer world on the left for the religious symbols on the right. Whatever you think of Jerome's desire to chastise himself by living in a cave in the wilderness, there's no doubt that Jerome, as depicted by Leonardo, has achieved his goal. He looks ghastly. If you find Jerome difficult to look at, consider that Leonardo's innovations gave artists such as Hals the ability to portray characters with emotional lives that you would probably find more appealing. That's the end of the talk about Leonardo. In looking at St. Jerome to write this essay, I have used the technique that I set out in How to Analyze and Appreciate Paintings. I look at the image as a whole, and I identify the subject. I look at the specific objects in it. I look at their attributes, color, texture, lighting, and so on. And finally, I look again at the painting as a whole. If you're interested, check out the book. My book, Innovators in Painting, which includes several chapters on Leonardo, is in progress. It focuses on innovations that gave the artists who created them, and all artists who followed, greater power to make viewers stop, look, and think about paintings. Innovators in Sculpture, which is already available, does the same for sculpture. If you'd like to be on my free Sunday recommendations list, visit the URL online or email me. The URL will tell you more about the content. DianeDurantewriter.com has hundreds of posts on sculpture, painting, Central Park, and my many other obsessions. And you can say, "Well done, Diane, I really appreciate that," or support my work and receive rewards via the tip jar on DianeDurantewriter.com. Thank you so much for listening.